you so much for coming on this video conference and WebEx and the Milken's conference on the reigniting India's growth amidst headwinds that we are seeing at times. India has been doing very interesting job at this point in time, and I really welcome all of you to this discussion with significant personalities from India. As you all know, that India is poised to become the fastest growing major economy as well as world's most populous country, but we must push ahead with a lot of new reforms and a lot of things that have happened. And one of the first things that everybody is asking is about India's vision to become $5 trillion economy. A lot has been done, a lot needs to be done. And this is one subject that we'll be starting with. Interestingly, we have an extraordinarily good panel today. So we have three great people. By the way, my name is Nishit Desai. I deserve the last introduction. And I'm an international lawyer, international tax and corporate lawyer, strategist, and specialize in globalization and asset management industry. And it's been great pleasure to be talking here, moderating this session, which is really a big convergence of the financial services sector. So maybe what I would like to do is to have Mr. Sanyal speak to us a little bit about, about $5 trillion economy and what are we doing, what has happened. It will be very useful for global investors to look at what actually is happening on the ground as compared to what they read in the newspapers and media. So Mr. Sanyal, can I request you to have a few words in the beginning and then we can build on the conversation as we go along. So over to you, Mr. Sanyal.
Thank you, Nishit. Thank you to Milken Institute for giving me an opportunity to be on a panel with the likes of Nadir and Arundhati. It's always a pleasure. This has been quite a year, as you all know. And, the world economy has gone through perhaps the biggest shock since the Great Depression and the Second World War. So not surprisingly, India has been impacted by that as well. And as a policymaker, I've had to, innovate quite a lot along the way. The policy response that India did through these last 9 months, however, were quite different from what many other countries did. And initially, at least, came in for some amount of criticism, though I think it is over time receiving some amount of respect as time is passing on. So let me explain the philosophy behind it, because many of you may know the actual policies, but let me explain what were we trying to do through these 9 months so that you know what was the underlying framework of thinking. You see, when we were hit by this shock, we really didn't know how long this would last, what the nature of this pandemic was. There were, at that time, if you will remember, back in March, many people said, some people thought it was just another bad flu. Others were predicting hundreds of millions of people getting impacted, millions of people dying in India alone, and so on. So in that situation of complete uncertainty, we essentially took up what those of you from a financial background will call a barbell strategy, which is what? Basically, you take two opposite strategies and combine them. So on one hand, you hedge for the very worst outcome. And on the other side, in a Bayesian step-by-step way, you respond because you are essentially dealing with complete unknowns. So this is how we went about both on the pandemic side and on the economic front. So on the health front, we did initially a very tight lockdown so that we got some time to work out what was happening on, from international information that we could gather, get some quarantining in place, get in place some amount of testing facilities and all of those kinds of things. And then step by step, we have eased it and continue to ease it even now. Exact same approach on the economic front. Obviously, when we did a full lockdown, we knew there was going to be a economic price to pay. At that time, many people said that we should do what some other countries did, which is to have a huge package right up front to reinflate the economy. Now, our argument at that time was there was no point in trying to reinflate an economy when we ourselves were pressing the brake. There's no point in pressing an accelerator when you've got your foot firmly on the brake. So what we did, just like with the barbell strategy, we focused on providing a safety net, not reinflating demand, but a safety net. So if you look at our interventions, they were aimed at making sure the very poorest people got food. We did the world's largest food program. 800 million people had access to food. We transferred some amount of money, not a lot, but some amount of money to the very poorest through the Jan Dhan account network. So basically, again, this is not an attempt to reinflate demand. This was, at least initially, just a safety net approach. Same thing was done with the SMEs and the business sector. We created moratoria. We provided some 100% guaranteed loans and so on and so forth. Idea is to provide a cushion. Now, as time passed, we were easing things up. And as the time passed, we, as I said right in the beginning, we took the call that this is not going to be a sprint. It was going to be a marathon, and we kept opening things up. Now, once you've opened things up, say by August, we were then in a position to begin to reinflate things. So starting September, October, right into November, you would have seen us then begin to put in place things that were meant to reinflate demand. And I'm glad to say that the economy has responded. Wherever we have opened things up, a significant amount of demand has indeed come back. Now, some of it may be pent-up demand. Some of it may be just the fact that we are opening things up, but demand has come back. Now, this is the moment where you take with the momentum and give it an extra push. So if you look at the more recent sort of interventions, they have been aimed towards acceleration. So just 2 weeks ago, the Honorable Finance Minister announced something which is meant to encourage formal employment. So basically providing through the EPF network, a support for hiring new people. Similarly, PLI schemes in specific sectors, the idea being to encourage people, the private sector, to invest again. So this is how we have gone about it. And let me say that we will continue to push along this line, whether through spending on asset creation and infrastructure, or other ways that we will do. Now, one other thing before I stop, there's another very big difference with how other countries have dealt with it. Most of them have focused only on the demand side. India has been different. We have invested a lot of effort into doing a large number of structural supply side measures, something that other people may be puzzled why we were doing. And so let me explain this as well. You see, the post-COVID world is not a reinflation of the pre-COVID world. It will have its own technologies, it will have its own geopolitics, its own supply chains, its own consumer behavior. Now, when we are going into this environment, we have to have an economy that is flexible and able to deal with the opportunities and problems of this new world. So if you look at the structural supply side reforms we have done, whether it's liberalizing agriculture, whether it is modernizing labor laws, whether it is in terms of removing all kinds of outdated telecom regulations on the IT and the BPO sector, and so on and so forth, the bilateral netting for the financial sector and so on, all of them are aimed at flexibility and adaptability and resilience for this new post-COVID world so that our economy can respond in time. So I hope that gives you some sense of how we are thinking about the current situation.
Yeah. Arundhati, can I ask you a question? As a businesswoman, and business person, what do you see are current impediments or what opportunities you see, in front of you, so we can have some perspective as to, how to move forward. So, what kind of problems you face, or what kind of opportunities you see in?
Yeah, thank you, Nishit. And I think Mr. Sanyal gave a very nice framework as to what has been the philosophy behind the response to this pandemic. We were on a journey to the 5 trillion economy when the pandemic struck. It's not that we were in a very good place at that point of time. The GDP was still slowing, and then came the pandemic. And overnight, things became very, very different. Everybody was rushing towards the contactless economy, people were wondering how to get along with their lives. So they needed to not only shop online, they needed to collaborate online, they needed to create online, and more than anything else, they needed to earn online. So, the entire concept of how we were transacting with each other, it had migrated into a contactless world almost overnight. And therefore, the needs that were put up at that point of time were very, very different. Now, what I think, would help us in this journey forward, because as Mr. Sanyal very rightly says, that India has not only tried to bring back demand, demand is back without a doubt. Now, whether it is pent up demand or whether it is sustained demand, we still have to see. However, what is required is on the supply side also, how do you make things easier and better for us to go towards that 5 trillion economy? And if we are looking at that, some of the recent things that have come out have really been very helpful. In the IT sector, for instance, where I am at this point of time, the taking away of certain of the other service provider issues has been a very big step. It's been something that this sector has been fighting for a very long time. And taking away the amount of compliances we needed to do, the very many issues we had for working from any place, working from home, taking away all of those restrictions and all of those restraints has actually been very liberating and very energizing, because I now see India to be one of the prime destinations for many of the KPOs and the back offices and the many of the remote offices that are going to get set up in the IT world. And you can already see that in the kind of hiring plans that are coming out for India from the IT sector. But similarly, I think what has been done in the area of agriculture, in the area of labor laws, they all feed into that motion of trying to ensure that the business becomes easier to do. Of course, there is still lots to be done. Are we done with all that we needed to do? Nowhere near it. But I would say that the philosophy is definitely there, and the effort to do that is very much in the works. Two or three areas where I think we can definitely concentrate on. One, of course, is infrastructure. Infrastructure is required not only for supporting that 5 trillion economy, but infrastructure is also one area where you can actually boost employment and bring in more and more people, into the earning streams, so that the demand generation automatically begins to happen. And for that, I think, in the area of infrastructure, something that I have said in many, many forums for a very long time is the requirement to put all of this together into one place, so that there is one authority that can look after the various pieces that are required, in order to get infrastructure in place. And the infrastructure could be actual physical infrastructure, it could be digital infrastructure, whatever you call it. The infrastructure space in India is something that definitely needs more attention. It has got a lot of attention, I don't deny that. But I think, it needs far more attention if we are going to support that 5 trillion economy, and if we want to ensure that more and more people are lifted above the poverty levels. So that's, I think, one area that we definitely need to look at. And the other area that I think, we need to definitely support, and I know Mr. Sanyal has a special interest in that area, is how do we go about this rural-urban divide? The urban divide that has happened, within the urban communities, we have seen that the growth in urbanization has not been as well planned as it should have been. And yet we had a great opportunity there. And that is actually resulting, we are now seeing the results of that, because today, while the rural people are still getting addressed, I think the urban poor are probably the maximum sufferers in this entire pandemic. And that is not something that we can afford, time and over again. And therefore, there is a requirement actually to look at the urbanization and how we go about it and what we do. Because again, while it has a potential for great creation of employment, it also has potential for creation of huge demand, and not only demand, of ensuring better quality of life for a lot of people. So we need to look at, I think, both of these two things, and these would definitely help and go a long way towards creating the kind of employment that we need to create in order to go towards the 5 trillion economy.
Yeah. In fact, I'm often thinking, are we going back to ruralization now? Because a lot of people have run off to the rural areas, and because of telecom infrastructure, we are able to operate from anywhere. I'm actually sitting in a small village, 30 minutes from Mumbai in Alibag, and I feel I should be here forever. Why I'm going back to Mumbai, at times? And Nadir, you've been, a great proponent of a green world, and I would also love to hear from you. You've done something fantastic on the on greening Mumbai part, some part of Mumbai. At the same time, first of all, why don't you tell a little bit about your experience on the manufacturing side, and what would you like to see change, and something that you can think of, so that we can go towards this 5 trillion economy. What are the impediments or anything that you feel, and how do you overcome that? You've done fantastic job in all said and done with all the constraint consistently, maybe for 100 or years. So would like to have your thoughts and share some experience or whatever it is. A little freewheeling discussion. So no
Yeah,
problem.
sure. I'll give you my views on the $5 trillion economy. Can India reasonably be a $5 trillion economy? Yes, of course, eventually. But is it something we can see as early as 2024? This always was a stretch, for sure. And now we've lost most of this year. The first quarter was a steep decline. Nor can we say the second's fine. Decline's still there. It's still a mess. The degrowth is smaller nonetheless. We'll have to make up that much more. It is a major challenge for sure. But even if we are somewhat late and achieve the goal by 2028, realistically, I'd have to state it would be fine. Of course, not great. Low double-digit growth was needed. Now 20% will have to be exceeded. The required rate is now so high, I'm really unsure how this will fly. We'll need strong winds as well as wings, and major cuts in restricting strings. For rapid growth, we need inclusion, or else there'll be much confusion. If inequality does rise, we surely will miss the prize. But more consumption equity could well propel the economy. With the pandemic, now one sees good profits for large companies, but revenues aren't so high. Reduction of costs is what they try. While of course they do gain, small suppliers feel the pain. But in good time, how will we grow if high consumption doesn't flow? More stimulus is what we need for all of us to succeed. But now we should make a bid to raise the bottom of the pyramid. And of course, we should try and implement a UBI. Some think the deficit might rise, but the high multiplier size, about 7 times to my mind, is high enough that you will find the mathematics is very sound. What goes around will come around. The revenue gain will neutralize the significant expenditure rise. And social spending is a must, or the social contract will go bust. We must spend on health and education for the benefit of the nation. Some worry how all this will fit. What about the deficit? But Nishit has a point that's good. The numbers he has understood. He says it makes much more sense to spend on peace than on defense. With all the money that is saved, our social path can be paved. I, of course, quite obviously support and heartily agree. We really need to do our bit, even if there's a deficit. Remember that we will have both good social progress as well as growth. The growth will then pave the way for a surplus at a later day. Unfortunately, in the news are stories of such vile abuse. The victims that one often sees are women, Dalits, minorities. Now, animal spirits can't be roused unless such social ills are doused. For rapid growth, We need R&D. This is a lacuna that we see. As other nations spend much more, we should avail of this cure. Both government and universities, as well as all our companies, need to spend and collaborate. Incentives here would be great. In services, we often lead, an area where we do succeed. The pandemic's rather rapid rise has led us all to digitize. The trend, of course, can only grow. Good benefits are bound to flow. We must harness all this gain, but also alleviate the pain. For a time, employment falls. We'll have to take some tough calls to educate and retrain, avoid the pain, and get the gain. Now, industry is our bugbear. We don't have much to show in there. An observer quickly understands bureaucracy ties all our hands. Of course, we should regulate, but don't you think it would be great if we had some simple laws and not huge tomes with many flaws? Our labor laws caused much distress. Indeed, they were a real mess. They need to be fair and efficient, both simple and quite sufficient. This is something we have started to redress, but we need some more progress. Capital and labor should unite as combatants in the common fight for a better economy, where every sector will then see good growth and prosperity for all of us, not you or me. Now, industry should export. Good trade deals must be sought. In agriculture, what we now see is abysmal productivity. This also means there is some scope, and so we shouldn't give up hope. We need much greater inspiration. The key will be digitization with IoT in every field. Digitally, we could all share best practices everywhere. I'm an advisor for Omnimo. The partners there are very sure startups can cause a transformation in information dissemination. Market linkages can be provided where once transactions were one-sided. We can now be very fair and equitably we can share. The middleman no longer tars. The farmer garners greater powers. A benefit we clearly see, smallholders gain efficiency. We never could have hoped for scale, but network effects can now prevail. All sectors do interact. It is indeed an obvious fact that synergies do exist. We must ensure that they aren't missed. The 5 trillion goal is very tough. The going will be rather rough. And even if we are quite late and reach our goal by 28, it really won't be all that bad. But, of course, we would be glad if, thanks to our deliberation, we change the path of our nation. Our panelists are very bright. I'm sure we could shed some light. And collectively, we do believe we have an advocate in Sanjeev. He has a really critical role in getting to this noble goal. Let's pull together. I'm very sure we'll do it soon, if not by 24. Thank you.
So thank you so much. You have covered so much. I think we all were going to talk about a lot of things you already covered into your interesting conversation.
And Nishit, if you give me a few seconds, I'll answer your question about being green.
Yeah.
My group will be carbon neutral, solid waste neutral, and water neutral by next year. And we have done this without any extraordinary expenditure. We have done a lot of energy saving, a lot of green energy at no extra cost, and a lot of offsets through our CSR budget. So I think everybody in India can aspire to be green. It is not that difficult. It doesn't need money, it needs thought. That's all.
You spoke about so many things. I don't know what one to pick up and what not to. But even omnivore, we have been lawyers to that, and whole conceptualization we did. It has done a fantastic job. Nobody wanted to pay attention. I agree. Everybody was doing other things, And I think they have done a fantastic job. I think impact investing is going to drive the next level as well, and the technology. One of the ways I think we can address value creation would be to look to the future. One of the things I am looking at, and that's what we specialize, is to look to the future. We do trend assessment and forecast, and we believe that every new technology, every new business model, every new social, political, or economic development brings along with it a new strategic, legal, or tax issue. Okay. Now, what we need to do, and where I found often we are missing out the bus, is that when we know these things are going to happen, but our regulatory and legal framework is not in place. So every time some new opportunity comes, and we are entangled into law. So something called driver and the driverless. So, you know, these new technologies, in fact, I was talking when Uber's Elevate CEO, who are going to introduce flying cars, he was in India, and we were talking to Mr. Fadnavis as well. And my take was, we specialize with drones and flying cars, but we said they decided 5 cities in the world. One of them was Mumbai to introduce flying cars in next. I said, they will come, but our legal regulatory regime will not be in place. You know, so marketplace, you know, you do a lot of research, you do development, everything. But when you have to go to market, your regulatory framework would be a big constraint. I think my suggestion would be to look to the future technologies, whether it's blockchain to IoT to even my campus where I'm sitting right now is again fully IoT driven. And we save so much of energy, so much of, you know, I would say environment and stuff like that, and do it. So 3D printing and bioengineering and all those things, quantum computing will be the next phase. One of the things we should do is to simultaneously think for next 3, 5, 7 years, this is the kind of regulatory regime, ethical regime we need to put in place. And that would be one of the things. Second trend I'm seeing, particularly after COVID, there is a lot of urge amongst almost everybody to do more philanthropy, because you don't know tomorrow what's going to happen. Most people think, now let me plan. I've worked hard to make money, but you don't know what's going to be tomorrow. So let me give something back to. So this is the best time to improve our philanthropy environment, and also how to deploy philanthropic money. For example, in CSR. Okay, so CSR is a very good tool to leverage the investment. So if currently CSR is not allowed to invest in impact investing, if we can do that. Similarly, if the philanthropy, okay, could come into the CSR space and both together, we have a huge pool of money just sitting in bank doing nothing. And I think if we can leverage that, that would be very helpful. But just coming back to Sanjeev, would you also tell a little bit about what is your role in the government? Of course, we have larger global audience, so sometimes they may not understand our.
Yeah.
It would be very useful for people to know how can you help.
So yeah, I'm the principal economic advisor to the government of India. I also serve as the co-chair of the G20's framework working group, which put together the global action plan for dealing with the current crisis, both on the economic and health front. So, and I have other roles as well. Just responding to Nadir's poem, thanks for that very amusing poem indeed. But you know, I am a writer, so let me also, and a policymaker, let me say that while visioning works in poetry, governance has to be done in prose. So, so you did raise a few issues, so let me respond to them. First of all, you talked about the willingness to expand the deficit in order to finance various things. And yes, I mean, unlike many countries, we actually do have more both monetary and fiscal space to provide support to the economy. But remember, it's not as if you either have a deficit or not. There are many shades of gray along the way, and one has to do it in a calibrated way. Something I did when Professor Stiglitz had also said, you know, why don't you just widen the deficit, do, you know, universal basic income, spend the money, print notes in order to do that, and monetize freely. I would say we need to calm down. Some things work in a calibrated way, but if you go beyond a calibrated way, you lose control. One of the things that we have achieved throughout this crisis is that macroeconomic stability has been maintained. Our current account is in surplus. We are accumulating foreign exchange reserves. In fact, through this crisis, India has accumulated $100 billion worth of foreign exchange reserves. And the rupee far from being under pressure to depreciate, is under tremendous pressure to appreciate. Even inflation has happened in food because of disruptions, but again, there's no demand-driven spiraling inflation. So please remember, this all works when some semblance of control and calibration is maintained. So let me say, from the government's perspective, we are willing to provide whatever support is needed from both fiscal and monetary side, but it will be calibrated, first of all. Secondly, a point that both Nishit and Nadir made, that there are bureaucratic hassles to new technologies being introduced. Absolutely. Please bring to our notice anything that gets in the way of big technological breakthroughs. We will make every effort to clean things up and get things moving. Arundhati mentioned about the fact that we got rid of all those outdated 20th century rules on OSPs and telecom usage and so on. We threw them all into the dustbin of history just about 10 days ago. And as she herself said, that has completely opened up new vistas. I mean, not only can we now think of ourselves being the back office to the world, there's an opportunity of being the front office to the world as well. And you mentioned about drones. We are fully aware of the importance of new drone technology. And Nishit pointed out, well, the Ministry of Civil Aviation has just created a Directorate of Drones, incidentally, and we are testing out, as we speak, in certain parts of the country, not in Mumbai though, but in other parts of the country, digital corridors so that drones can fly. So maybe you'll be surprised how fast we will move to this, and we are totally with what is happening. If you don't think it's good enough, tell us what are the rules, we'll change them for you. So we are totally out there for you. We want India to be a $5 trillion economy much before 2028, I can assure you. Maybe a little bit delayed from 24, but not too much. I can assure you our growth in the financial year 21-22 will be really strong. We have every indication of it. And we will make up quite a lot of the lost space. And of course, our exchange rate, as it happens to be, is turning out to be a lot stronger than anybody expected. So given all those things, I think we will be there, not too much delay.
Just to pick up on a point which I think Arundhati made about infrastructure and drones, and we help government develop some of the policies with JNCI and later on also on development of the policy. One way in which I'm looking at is that infrastructure would be a little bit of a constraint for some period of time, but the future infrastructure, we just really need to be careful that if this payback period is 15-20 years or so, we should be revisiting the damage to environment plus other kind of stuff and what new technology can do. For example, Rwanda has done away with not building roads, but use drones, and of course in future it will be flying cars. So in next 5 years, flying cars will be a reality. 10 years time it will be a common mode of transport. So many places we will be using drones. Rwanda is a very good case study. I'm sure you might perhaps be aware of all that. So many technologies will replace the traditional infrastructural, address traditional infrastructural constraint. And that would be one of the things that we can discuss at more length some point in time. How can we quickly overcome our infrastructure development using new technologies? And Arundhati, I think you can say a few words. Of course, we have for 10 minutes more.
My only request for infrastructure is that there are too many agencies and too many ministries, including the fact that in many cases, the center and the state both are involved. So, just as our large northern neighbor has done, what is required is when somebody comes and wants to make an investment, or somebody, even if it's an Indian investor wanting to make an investment into infrastructure, you need the help of both from the center and the state to literally handhold this particular investor till the lights come on. So it's very important, because otherwise the amount of time that is spent in getting all the approvals, getting everything in place is actually humongous. We don't have the means of executing on our plans as efficiently as we should. Much of the stuff that we already are doing many of the resources that we are using, they can actually deliver far better results if we use the right technology. And in many cases, digital is actually the answer. So whether we are talking about education, whether we are talking about healthcare, whether we are talking about inclusion, much of this can be achieved in a far more efficient and far more productive way with the proper use of digital platforms. So I think digital platforms are already coming up, but what is the incentive we are giving to the users? Sometimes what happens is that the users are actually investing a lot, but because in order to make it more accessible to people, everything is kept free. Now, if everything is kept free, you will not have the kind of investment into those areas as you would like others to make. And therefore, my request only is that let's look at sustainable models of working on these things. And we should definitely, make a differentiation between profit and profiteering. What the government needs to see is that there are adequate profits for investment coming into the country, but not profiteering. As long as that distinction is made, as long as things become easier by the means of having a single spark for doing whatever you are trying to do, I think these are material changes that will change the entire way that India is viewed by the Indian as well as the external investor. So that's my request, and I'm sure Mr. Sanyal knows all of this. It's like taking coals to Newcastle. I don't have to do that with him. But further efforts on this front, it would definitely make a big difference.
And Mr. Sanyal also knows that I think we have so much capital also waiting. I deal with a lot of sovereign funds and pension plans. They want to come on a long-term basis. And we are also very keen on doing that. It's just there is something that we need to connect. And if we can find some connectors, it is not it will come or not come. It is not whether we'll have $5 trillion or not. But I think how quickly we can reach there. And if we can work together, I think that would be extremely helpful. One other thing, Arundhati, I would like to take another is more on manufacturing, you're on services. My feel is that in short term, we really need to focus on services. It has created largest number of employment in the last 5 years, whether it's delivery boys or logistics centers or otherwise in technology, otherwise, and that is our strength. So what is your perspective on services in the short run? And, because of course, manufacturing in little longer run or medium term, 5-10 years, but what I feel is little lesser, at least known. Government may be doing a lot of things, but we may not be knowing much about it. But services is the way to get higher value, higher, quicker and faster growth, and also get more people employed in the whole sector. But I was just wanting to get some feel, and then we can have a few statements from each one of you, and maybe then we'll close.
So on the services front, my feeling is that, India sort of, skipped the manufacturing stage and went straight into services. One of the reasons for that was that we are resources poor. And because we are resources poor, services doesn't need the amount of capital investment that manufacturing normally does. And that's the reason, plus it was less regulated. And that's the reason services flourished in this country. Frankly, we have an inherent strength in services, and there is no reason why we shouldn't leverage it further. Absolutely, that's what we need to do. But even there, I think, we need to target the higher end jobs, not the lower end ones, because the lower end ones you can disrupt very quickly. Delivery boys can be disrupted by drones very, very quickly. But if you go for the higher end ones, the highly skilled ones, which again, Indians are very good at, we are one of the few countries where I have found reskilling to be something that you can do with even far older people without too much of a trouble. People are willing to get reskilled, and they are able to pick up and absorb because, they are resilient by nature. By nature, I think India is very, very resilient. And I think, therefore, there is a huge future in services. We surely should have a look at that and see how best we can maximize that area.
I think Mr. Sanyal would have some point of view on services as well. And
I think. Very briefly, services as now dominates our economy. As Arundhati pointed out, we did sort of not quite skip, but certainly made a very short trip through the sort of industrial stage of development. But this government does believe that we do need to have some amount of variety, and that so consequently through these new PLI schemes, we are providing a bit of a push to the manufacturing sector. We do need to be part of global supply chains and so on. But I do agree with Arundhati on one thing, that we haven't sort of reached the limits of what we can do with services. And I go back to saying that there is an opportunity for India to become the front office of the world. After all, we have all, even grandmas are now used to doing Zoom calls. So there is no reason why we shouldn't be the front office to the world. But there are other services too, not just IT-enabled services. I mean, India is extremely underleveraged in many areas, like tourism, for example, which has been badly hit by this particular episode. But it is an area which we have barely scratched. India is a particularly picturesque country, and we barely take advantage of it. Then there are all kinds of other services from health, education, etc. So let me say that this is a country that really underleverages itself, and some part of it is simply unimaginative policymaking. We are working very hard to get rid of some, literally decades-old reforms that were stuck, from everything from agriculture to services to manufacturing. We have changed it. We are willing to change more. Just bring to our notice large changes that can be made with high multipliers, and we will definitely take them seriously and have a look at them. And of course, that's from the central government's perspective. There are state governments that are also working very hard trying to change things. Uttar Pradesh, not very often known as a state at the cutting edge of industrial policy, but look at what they've done in the last 6 months. So a lot of things are going on here in India, and we are absolutely open both to domestic and foreign investors. So with that, let me hand it back to you, Nishit.
Yeah, thank you so much. Nadir, do you have any word on that? Because services is something that I think we should be really talking about now as a nation.
We are running out of time, so all I'd like to say is that we have a lot of potential and a lot of challenges.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. As I say that, I think for 5 trillion economy, I think let us also really boost up our services. It doesn't require immigration, regulations to be considered. You can export anyway. Goods always need import, export, no problems. So I think services are our forte. And whether it's developed countries or developing countries, we have so much talent and so much, ability to export services, including, of course, working around, things that we have never thought of before. So I think that's one suggestion I would like to make. And this conference has been of great benefit to a number of large investors around the world. And they are all looking, and my interaction with them, I'm on the chairman circle of Milken Institute, and it would be very nice for us to see what are the opportunities that are coming up in services sector, but at the same time, in next 5-7 years, what are the changes we would like to see in manufacturing sector? Both together will create a new economy. And thank you for giving us this opportunity to expose India to the outside world, especially in the financial services sector, which is waiting to invest in India.